For this afternoon and tonight, a significant winter storm, including heavy snow with limited drinking.
Hello and welcome to the Snowbrains podcast, where it's my job to interview the most intelligent people in the snow sports industry and pass their fascinating knowledge onto you, our listeners. I'm your host, Miles Clark. I'm a professional free skier, a mountain guide, an Alaska heli ski guide, a UC Berkeley molecular cell biology graduate, the founder and CEO of Snowbrains, and I've been skiing in Italy for the past week. Courmayeur. The mix of high altitude, fear, big terrain, amazing cuisine, friendly people, exquisite architecture, and non-stop style is truly bizarre for us Americanos. Grazie, Italia. This episode of the Snowbrains podcast is brought to you by Club Med. Are you ready for an unforgettable ski getaway that takes care of everything? And I mean everything. Head to one of Club Med's mountain resorts where you can experience the thrill of the slopes without worrying about a thing. With their all-inclusive packages, you'll get all your lift tickets, ski passes, ski and snowboard lessons for all ages and ski levels, delicious meals, exciting apres-ski activities, and even childcare for the kids, all included in the price. So you can focus on what matters most, carving perfect turns and enjoying the breathtaking views. Visit www.clubmed.us or call 1-800-CLUB-MED or call your travel advisor to book your ski escape today. My guest today is Erin Sprague, the CEO of Protect Our Winters, a nonprofit organization built on fighting climate change in every way they know how. Hello, Erin. Welcome to the show. Thank you very, very much for being here today. How are you?
I'm in my second favorite place beside a ski hill, which is talking to an audience that loves snow sports. So let's get into it.
Well, you've got the right people here. These listeners are freaks for this stuff. I always ask, when did you ski last and how many days have you skied this winter?
I mean, the answer should be today, but like busy work and climate action all day. No, the last day was this past Sunday. I live in Boulder and my daughters, they're 5 and 7, and the little one's learning to ski, so I'm her instructor, and then the older one is on the ski team. So I did some downhill, some instruction, some Nordic skiing. My husband went backcountry skiing, and this was like all before noon. So
Wow.
that's like a standard day with 2 young kids.
And so you're in Boulder. Do you go to Eldora? Is that the close spot?
Yeah, we go to
Perfect.
Eldora, and then I used to work at Aspen Skiing Company, so we go back up there a lot. I have a lot of couches I can still crash on, and
Nice.
yeah. So we'll go up there this weekend. We're icon pass people in the Front Range.
Love it. Well, Erin, today I'm so curious about you and POW, but I really want to dive into your experience as CEO of Protect Our Winters, which we might say POW a lot for the acronym, and how we can all work together to stem greenhouse gas emissions. And I definitely want to learn more about your amazing background and especially you running a marathon in Antarctica. That's ridiculous. So if we could start with your life story, I usually ask folks for a quick and dirty 3-minute life story, but if yours goes over, because yours has a lot in it, that's totally okay.
I'm also old, so it might just be longer than 3 minutes. Like we have more ground to cover. But I was born in the Adirondacks in upstate New York. I grew up skiing at Gore Mountain, if any of your listeners are from the Adirondacks or have been there. My dad was a police officer and volunteer ski patrol member, so that was how 4 kids got to ski. And when you grow up there, picture in your mind like an Adirondack chair overlooking a lake, beautiful, rugged, four-season mountains. Your only choice is to love the outdoors. And my family just got out so much. We were hikers, we biked. I was a competitive runner. I Nordic ski race in the winter. That's a sport I still love today. And it just gave me this passion for doing this work. So I went to college in Boston because I thought, ooh, I'm a little country mouse. I need to go to a city and see if I can survive, basically. And after that, I studied history and I was really curious about business and finance. And so,
Hmm.
for listeners who are maybe getting into the outdoor industry or who are thinking about their future careers, I think getting early experience in business is really important no matter what you do. So, I worked at this huge company called the Blackstone Group in New York City after I graduated. It's finance, it's like a lot of hardcore spreadsheets. I was like a little grunt analyst. And one of the projects I worked on was our public policy initiatives and our public affairs. So that was my first introduction to the power of policy as a lever, which is really important in POW. But as I was doing it, I was still running, I was like still doing sports, and I was like, I like really care a lot more about sports. So I realized that the outdoor industry is $1 trillion industry and it needs talent and new perspectives. And at the time, I was a cyclist. So I ended up getting an internship at Specialized, which is you probably have all heard of a big bike company. And they're the type of company that gives a lot of really, frankly, undeserved autonomy and ownership to young people who have no experience. And I fell in that category. But where they're smart is they find people with a lot of hustle and drive and a lot of passion for innovation and for the sport. And at the time, like I was riding, 100 milers every weekend. I lived in California. I was super into the cycling scene there. And that was what started my outdoor industry journey. And as you progress through outdoors, I worked in cycling, I worked in running with Virgin, and I eventually worked in skiing at Aspen Skiing Company. Climate and environment are just, they're always there. It isn't a nice to have in those businesses, especially in snow sports. It's super present, and I started to really see and understand climate. It's hard to learn about climate. We'll talk about that more today. But it just became this like rally cry of this is business continuity and this is the hardest problem to possibly solve in the world, and it needs more people working on it. So I ended up transitioning into climate, starting with climate tech companies and developing a technology skill set, and then moving into POW, which I had always been involved with as a volunteer, as a brand alliance member. Aspen is a big supporter of POW. I joined their board. And then when the CEO seat opened up, our founder, Jeremy Jones, was like, hey, why don't you apply? And I was like, no, 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 I'm doing all these like other tech companies. And he said I should think about it like he thinks about mountains. He said, if you're still thinking about this in a month, you need to call me and we need to talk about this and build a plan for POW's future. And that's basically what happened. It was a mountain I wanted to climb. So here I am at POW, and it's no looking back. It's the perfect combination of climate and outdoor work.
Wow. Well, I really love that because I do think that, having worked for Blackstone and some of the things that are sort of on the other end of the spectrum of the outdoor industry, but you have to have that kind of knowledge to know how business works and how you might be able to. I always use the word manipulate, and people think that's a negative word. So how you can change, businesses to see eye to eye and understand why good climate policy is good for business. And you have that background. And I think you brushed over a lot of things. So I just got to plug that she went when she said you went to school in Boston, she went to Harvard, and then she went to graduate school at Stanford. And it looks like you've worked for Google, Nest, Specialized, Virgin, who is Sir Richard Branson. That's incredible. And obviously Blackstone and more. So to me, you're very high powered and proven. And so POW must have been a really cool experience for you and a pay cut. But um, we'll move on.
Yes, I'll leave it at
So so
that.
thank you, because if more people had your ideas and energy and intelligence, that would help us in this fight against climate change. We'd be in a better spot. So thank you for what you've done and your sacrifice and your pay cut. So why don't we start with, let's just start from the bottom. Let's explain the mission and the goals of Protect Our Winters.
I'm assuming that 100% of people listening to this love the outdoors.
Yes.
And that is our target customer, if you will, at POW. We are trying to unite every outdoor enthusiast. There are 175 million of them in the US into a movement for climate action. So, one of the things that happens in climate is there isn't a lot of what we call cultural and political willpower. So I'll give you a stat that helps explain this. If you run a survey just to like the general population, 70% of people not only care about climate and believe in it, but want something done about fixing it. And that's a really big number. We weren't there 5, 10 years ago.
Mm-mm.
However, if you look at this past election, 7% of people prioritize climate when they vote. So there's this disconnect. People want to see action, but when you get to like brass tacks and the ways that you can take action, it isn't happening. And it's not happening because climate is politicized. I do and don't understand why. I think it's crazy that natural spaces and the beauty of our outdoor world has become this contentious political issue when historically it's actually been very cross-partisan. Historically, Republicans have been huge leaders in the climate movement or environmental movement until today. And what POW does is we start with simply rooting in people's outdoor passion. If you love to ski, ride, hike, climb, get outside, that is a basis to us for coming together and forming a movement and demanding the systemic change that climate requires. And it also doesn't have to be like scary and wonky. There's some really cool science in climate. It can be really fun. And so at POW, we also try to bring together people in communities based on what they love and take action in a way that isn't scary, isn't perfect, but drives us forward towards solutions.
Well, I can confidently say that our audience, I believe, skews nerdy. So yeah, so if there's
Nice.
anything nerdy or fun statistics, feel we're into that. So the science and all that is quite fun, I think. So 175 million of us in the US are recreating outdoors, care about the outdoors. Probably nobody in the US would raise their hand if we asked who wants dirtier air and dirtier water. So I think what you're saying is
Exactly.
true. And one of the things that really broke through with me when I was learning more about POW, I think when I talked to Jeremy Jones on this podcast, is one of the only ways, at least here in the US, to really make change is to get a lot of people to sign on. So we need people to sign on to POW. And you can maybe speak more to this. And now I've already kind of, my knowledge has been tapped out. What's the best way? Because I think Snowbrains is a quote unquote member, but what can people do to help protect our winners move forward? I feel like we should just confront this at the very beginning of the podcast.
The first thing to do is to learn.
Hmm.
So start by really understanding climate. Start by understanding that it's our natural first instinct to think, what can I do about climate? And that actually isn't the right first question. Climate is this big, huge, almost like existential issue that you have to break down into pieces. The fundamental challenge with climate is that it's rooted in the ways that we operate as humans. So, how we travel, how we eat, how our buildings are heat and cooled, primarily the sources we're using for energy for all of those things. And historically, energy has come from fossil fuels. And fossil fuels are why the world is getting warmer. You burn them, carbon goes into the atmosphere, and things get not only warmer, but less stable. And we're seeing that in wildfires, in flooding, in hurricanes, in all of these natural disasters that are now impacting communities. So the first thing to understand is that this isn't an individual problem. You and I could live in a dark hole and stop eating and traveling and consuming, and it wouldn't make inch of difference in this entire crisis. What's needed is what we call systemic change. So
Hmm.
that means changing those systems that I just talked about. And here's the good news. This is solvable. It's not like traveling to Mars, as some people in society want to do right now. Like, we actually don't have the science for that yet. We have the
Hmm.
science today to solve the climate crisis. The challenge is we have to shift these human systems against a very powerful status quo, which is the fossil fuel industry, lobby, special interests against this cohort of small and mighty, and as you pointed out, wildly underpaid environmental activists, right? So to get there, we have to come together. You might hear this called community organizing or power building. Those are like kind of wonky terms. We have to come together in our communities and present more of a force for action. So if you think about our political leaders, their job really is to lead a better future for our country, but their job tactically is to get reelected in their next election. And when
Hmm.
they see only 7% of people are voting on climate, of course they're not going to prioritize it. So the ways to really help on this is to first lean into that nerdiness that all of you have. I'm so happy to hear that. You're my people. And learn about this and like don't be intimidated. This whole system is actually designed to intimidate, to make it harder. There's a lot of misinformation. POW seeks to be a go-to source for outdoor enthusiasts on like what's actually happening here. And this isn't like an activist perspective. We are cross-partisan centrists and to give some of that information. The second is to join us. So everyone always asks me, is my EV good? Should I get solar? What should I do on climate? So like, yes, I can give you a list of things that you can do in your life that means you're living what we call an examined life. We should absolutely practice our values. Those things are also expensive. So you don't have to feel that you have to do that all at once. The most important thing you can do is support and join advocacy organizations that are driving these systemic changes through laws. So I will tell you, I am actually like a fairly libertarian person. I'm like, there's a lot of government in this. Wouldn't like the free markets be better?
Uh-huh.
In climate, that doesn't work. Because if you have companies trying to like lead the way, they are reducing their profits in most cases by taking meaningful action on climate. And what we need are laws. Laws would level the playing field. Policies that transition us to clean sources of energy would level the playing field for every company to do what they do best, which is run their company. And so we look at laws, policies, legislation as the lanes that we want to be in. And for individuals to be a part of that, you have to join a movement and you have to join an advocacy group. And POW is one. You can join us individually, you can join us through your company, but we're a way that you can then access those big sources of change.
So if you had to boil down POW's number one goal into one bullet point, what would that be?
Solve climate change.
I guess I'm fishing now, but might it be to change laws, to make governmental change?
Absolutely. So
Mhm.
we want to reduce fossil fuel use through policies and legislation that drive an energy transition.
Okay.
So we want to pass policies, laws that create cleaner sources of energy, that protect our beautiful natural spaces. A lot of people don't know this, but those spaces are often sold to fossil fuel companies for development of oil pipelines, for example. So we want to protect those. And we want to bring everyone together as we do it. Adjacent aspect of this movement, climate has all these tentacles. Democracy is really important to climate. Community is another one. I have lived in mountain towns now for almost 10 years, and the community of mountain towns is really special. And like many communities, it's at risk. There are mental health challenges, we're less connected. And solving these problems can be a way that we not only come together, but we also do a lot of work in communities. Communities are a place where you can get more sources of clean power in your city and some of these important laws. So we do federal legislation. That's going to be really hard in the next 4 years, to be honest. So we're
Mhm.
really focused on state and local legislation, utilities, city council meetings, judicial appointments, the local dog catcher, whoever it is. We want you to be pro climate and we're going to help you out if you're with us.
So terrific. So POW's goal is to slow down climate change. And so it does sound like people is where the power is. So if we really did get 175 million people to sign up for POW, it's almost like people might be able to relate to a union. So the auto workers union, the bigger that is, the more political power they're going to have. Period. End of story. It's not, there's no other way to read that. So the bigger POW is, the bigger these climate advocacy groups are, the more power they're going to have in Washington, state, local. So and you're nodding, so I think that we agree on that. And so that seems to make a lot of sense. So how does POW make an impact in those zones, and how do you measure those results?
Yeah, well, first, I just want to pause on this example of power. You brought up a great example. Unions have a
Hmm.
lot of power.
Yes.
Look at what the ski patrollers just achieved with Vail with their
Yep.
wages.
Huge.
They achieved a really difficult change. I feel so inspired by them. And when we look at other groups that have built power, another great example is the National Rifle Association, the NRA. They have 4 million members. We have way fewer members of POW than that. They are an organization that is built for power and to drive legislation to protect their interests. So, whether you agree with what they do or not, it is irrefutable that they have built significant and frankly outsized power. There are fewer gun owners in the United States than there are outdoor enthusiasts. And I was saying this to someone in our community, and they were like, "Oh, Erin, but they're so powerful because they're fighting for something that they don't want to lose." And I was
Mm.
like, "We're fighting for
So are
something
we.
we don't want to lose." We are losing our snowpack. We are losing our public lands. We are losing clean air, clean water. We are losing the social fabric of our communities. And that's why I feel so passionate about POW because it's this Trojan horse where we can come in and we're not going to come in and tell you what to do. That's not our role. We're going to come in and we're going to invite you to be a part of something that matters, that's going to help the community that you live in, and that's going to keep it really fun along the way. So when we look at the places where we do that, we're focused in a couple lanes. So first, we do a lot of education. We're going to do a series called Make Climate Cool Again. I don't understand why it's not cool right now. Jeremy Jones is the coolest snowboarder ever. All of our athletes are so inspiring. We are going to get them back out front and center. Our American heroes, our Olympians, our World Cup winners, our fastest known time runners, our climbers who climb these crags that make my stomach drop. They are so amazing at what they do, and we're going to leverage some of their platforms to help people understand what's going on in this space. The second thing we're going to do is we're going to protect public lands. So we're recording this in the first couple weeks of President Trump's administration. And one of the proposals that he has is to sell American public lands to pay for tax cuts for billionaires. So I just want to pause. It always gets a little, spicy when we wade into the political waters.
Mhm.
First, POW's cross-partisan. We're not endorsing a candidate either way. We are looking at the truth of what are our candidates supporting or not. And selling our public lands is not good business. It's an incredibly short-term strategy, and it is incredibly harmful to the future of recreation. And if it was going to something like education for all, maybe I could say, okay, well, let's weigh the pros and cons, but it's not really going in the right direction. So we protect lands in Alaska, Utah, Colorado, and we measure that. So I'll give you a measurement in that. Last year, we POW individually sent 10% of the letters to the Bureau of Land Management that led to 28 million acres of protection in Alaska.
Wow.
Many other environmental groups we were a coalition. So we all sent this portion of letters. We came together and we got this done and protected that land with the Biden administration.
Amazing. Wow. And I just wanted to add, because I was reading recently that, some of this might feel nebulous or unreal to some people, but I know that Wyoming and Utah are both working right now in their state legislator to sell off public lands as well. So they're trying to figure out how to get the rights to sell federal land that's in their states, and they would probably be selling it to oil and gas and mineral exploration. So these are things that are actually on the table. These aren't things that could happen. These are things that legislations in places that you love, because I think all of us can appreciate Grand Teton National Park. We can appreciate Yellowstone National Park. We can appreciate all of the amazing national parks like Zion in Utah.
Yeah, and I have to give a lot of credit to the hunting and angler communities. They have spoken out against this. These are traditionally more conservative groups who have said, this isn't right. And so this is a place where we can come together. But you're absolutely right. This is all happening. And the third arm of what we try to influence is clean energy. So this can be a super wonky topic. So at the most basic level, think about your home. think about how your lights get turned on and how is that power coming into your home. It's coming through an electric grid. You've probably mountain biked past power lines at some point. One of my favorite ski trails at Aspen goes through the glades along power lines. And within those power lines, electricity is moving, and we want power to be generated from clean sources like wind, solar, and we want to reduce fossil fuels like natural gas, coal, and oil. That's like the most basic version of what this is. But the third thing we do is we try to explain what it means to have an energy transition from fossil fuels to clean sources, how those sources are now cheaper. They are actually the cheapest sources of energy in most places, and people don't know that. And this is why just like talking on this podcast, showing up as a citizen to learn the truth of this is really important. And then we show up at city council meetings. Jeremy was at one in Tahoe last year. And like, let me tell you, those places are gnarly. Like, you have every perspective, it comes out of the woodwork. And we show up and we advocate for getting more sources of clean energy, which leads to more reliable power for most people. Small mountain towns often suffer from power shortages, blackouts, natural disaster impacts. Clean energy is a better pathway to have more reliable power and to help with the climate crisis.
I was just going to say, as you were speaking, I was writing down a question that green energy is getting so cheap now. I think it's the cheaper alternative, and it's Texas leading the way. So I think that the only thing in this world that is bipartisan is money. That is where the huge breakthrough is happening right now, is once money is on the side of climate change and green energy, that's when the tipping point is going to occur.
That is absolutely the right insight. And I empathize with people who are prioritizing the economy right now. Like, we
Mhm.
don't want to be a group of out of touch environmentalists. That's not who we are. We are pragmatists. And one of the reasons we advocate for clean energy is because it creates jobs. So, most of the jobs created by the most recent significant climate legislation. It's called the Inflation Reduction Act. It put 400 billions of dollars into the economy to drive clean energy. Those jobs are going mostly to red states. And like,
Mm.
we talk to Republicans about this and they're like, "Oh yeah, you're totally right. We just, can't really talk about that right now." And it's like, well, maybe we should. And the messaging around the importance of American dominance and energy security and national security, that totally resonates with me. The pathway to that is to own this future technology. Right now, we are getting our asses kicked by China on electric vehicle technology, on solar technology, and on deployment. If we owned that, we would be world leaders in the next stage of energy technology. And for our consumers, to your point, it is cheaper. You compare that with the election, the fossil fuel industry spent $400 million to elect Donald Trump. Environmentalists don't even know what that number means. We have never seen that much money. And so I would just ask your listeners to question that. To me, like as a human, something just feels a little off there. And if there's all this data on this being like our technology future, our economic present, why aren't we pursuing wind and solar as our primary sources of energy?
It's a great question. And obviously, POW is doing what they can to try to get clean energy out there. What might be some key initiative or campaigns that POW is currently focusing on for green energy?
So, our most recent ones, all right, this is going to get wonky. I'm trusting you that this
Uh,
is a crowd of nerds.
Well, what happened is we screened for them by accident. I've just had my very first couple podcasts were about like COVID with a medical doctor, and I had my surgeon on. Like it's just like whether they like it or not, they're getting screened.
I
So if,
love
if there's
it.
if they're still around after whatever this is, 80 episodes, they're nerds at this point.
All right, I want to teach everyone about rural electric co-ops. Pow taught me about these. These are nonprofit, member-owned utilities that occur primarily in rural areas. So if you live in a city, you don't have a rural electric co-op. But if you live in Aspen or Telluride, you have a rural electric co-op. And they are basically your local utility. And you elect the people who make decisions about where your energy comes from. So, what POW does is we go and identify candidates for these elections. They're not the most popular. Dog catcher might be more popular these days, but they have a truly incredible amount of control over how these local electric grids, the places you get your electricity for your homes and businesses from, how they transition to greener energy. So, an example from the Roaring Fork Valley in Colorado, their utility is called Holy Cross. When the team, alongside the sustainability team at Aspen Snowmass, started working on this, I think it was like 70% coal. Like it was such a
Mm,
dirty utility. And fast forward 5 to 10 years later, they are at 70 to 90% renewables, all from
wow.
stacking the board with people who wanted to transition to renewable sources of energy.
That
And
sounds
when
like
we
a
do that,
terrific measurable result. Congratulations. Continue.
it's hugely measurable. So now what we're going to do is we're going to pick local projects. There are like thousands of them. And what
Mhm.
happens with clean energy is they get bogged down. So you have fossil fuel interests who roll in and drive misinformation campaigns. So be on the lookout for
Even
that.
in these small communities.
Oh, yeah. I'll give you an example. Ophir, Colorado, it's a town of about 200 people outside of Telluride. They went in and told people that solar panels cause cancer. That is not true. And so
Wow.
you had people rolling up to the city council meeting. And of course, they should be questioning that if that's something that they've heard and haven't talked to clean energy leaders on. So these initiatives get slowed down. And slowing things down is a tried and true tactic of the status quo. Put in more requirements for permitting, put in another environmental study. When the reality is we are in a climate emergency and these new sources of energy need to be rolled out as fast as possible. Last year was the hottest year on record. All of you are seeing the changes to our snowpack and the instability in our weather. So we go in and we have an organization within POW that works on these local elections. We plan to show up to these council meetings. Like, we're going to roll in with like Tommy Caldwell, the rock climber, or like Jesse Diggins, who's like the best Nordic skier in US history. And like, we're going to like dominate these town councils. Like, I'm so excited. And we're going to talk about just the basics of this. And there are so many benefits also to having battery storage and reliability. So, helping with some of those conversations. And we're going to build a toolkit. We can't be in every community, but we're going to build a toolkit that people can take and use our playbook to activate in their own communities as well.
Wow, that sounds terrific. And I just wanted to add, because I'm here in Jackson, Wyoming today, that I can see the resort from my window. This is my new room. It's amazing. Jackson Hole Ski Resort is 100% wind energy powered, and that has been going on for a while. So I don't know if they were, because I don't know enough, you know more. I don't know if they were able to bypass their local, I forget what you called it, the rural grid that they have, or if that's part of what's going on here. So just Jackson Hole, just yet another place that understands this. This episode of the Snowbrains podcast is brought to you by Club Med. Calling all skiers and snowboarders, escape to the snowy peaks of Europe, Japan, China, or Canada with Club Med. Their more than 20 all-inclusive mountain resorts offer unparalleled convenience and endless adventures. Explore world-class ski resorts, indulge in authentic gourmet dining, and unwind with lively apres-ski activities. Let Club Med take care of everything so you can simply relax and enjoy your ski getaway. Visit www.clubmed.us or call 1-800-CLUB-MED or call your travel advisor to discover your ski paradise. And I did want to just ask really quick, what is your strategy for convincing these small boards of supervisors, if you will, on choosing green energy? I'm guessing it's just financial at this point, that it's cheaper and it's more long lasting.
It's all of the above. It depends on the communities. Some communities that have suffered from natural disaster impacts care a lot about reliability and backup power. Some really care about economics. Ski resorts, I'll give a lot of credit. Go Jackson, wind power and
Mhm.
waffles. Like they have
Yeah.
the formula down, but they've had to be leaders. That's what's different about ski. You look at a company like a tech company and they've put out some big ambitions, but the truth is, artificial intelligence, their core product requires a lot of energy. You look
Hmm.
at a ski company, they also require energy, snowmaking, lodges, lifts. And if they don't have snowpack, they're not running their business. So
Hmm.
I give a lot of credit to Aspen, Jackson, Alterra. The owners of Icon Pass are another great partner. Killington has new ownership, and we've had amazing conversations with them so far. But for them, they're making decisions that one, a lot of their customer base is demanding. So that's the power of building this collective. And
Hmm.
second, they're just running their resorts better while they also set up the future of their business.
I love that. And to go on the other side of the coin here, what industries globally have the biggest impact on climate change? Who's putting the most carbon into our air, and how can they be stopped? And is it realistic to hope we can stop them?
It's 100% fossil fuel companies. So
Hmm.
not 100%, but 40% technically. But like the core problem here, you can get distracted by smaller categories. The most important category to focus on is fossil fuels. It's oil, gas, coal. That's like the first thing we have to tackle. And that happens at an industry level. There are individual contributions to that. Transportation is the largest emissions category for most states. But
Hmm.
again, like what is behind that transportation emission? It's the use of gas in cars.
When you say fossil fuel companies, you're talking about extraction and distribution, like Exxon, these big ExxonMobil, these kind of big companies. That makes sense. So it's essentially burning fossil fuels, burning oil, and putting carbon into the air. And I'm sure our listeners are familiar with the greenhouse effect, and that's what's increasing that greenhouse effect that is warming up our planet. And so I guess the secondary questions I had in there is, how can they be stopped, and is it realistic to hope we can stop them?
Good questions. First, I want to make sure people don't take this as like an impractical vilification of like the reality of our energy situation. We often talk about this as an energy transition.
Hmm.
And oil and gas, plastic, they have all these problems. They have all these benefits too, right? You could not just shift our society today. This is where like we kind of have this joke at POW because we try to appeal to a centrist position. The people who are on the left get mad at us, and people who are on the right get mad at us.
Hmm.
We're not like chaining ourselves to trees. We're not activists. We have super respect for what those people do. We are pragmatists. So we are looking at, okay, we use a lot of oil and gas and fossil fuels today. It's like 60% plus of global energy. We need to transition as quickly as possible, but we're realists about what that's going to take. And so ideally, we're working on a pathway collaboratively for that. That's not the reality of the current political regime and administration. So, what a lot of organizations like us are doing now is we're doing state and local initiatives. So, states are huge leaders in climate. It's amazing. We're going up against this huge status quo, and the federal government has basically endorsed the status quo.
Hmm.
But states, in the last election, states passed $18 billion of direct ballot initiatives that support climate action. California, one of the biggest economies in the world, when you compare it country by country,
Number five.
like number five,
Yeah.
amazing.
Hmm.
Like they're doing some of the most progressive policy work in a big, complicated state. So that
Hmm.
gives me a lot of hope. And then you brought up the example of Texas. Texas is an amazing example of what renewable energy can do from an economic perspective in a red state.
It's kind of amazing. I love that. But it might be hard to stop these companies, in the way that we think of, you mentioned villain, which always makes me think of the victim, villain, hero narrative. But one of the ways that just occurs to me, and I'm playing this harp too much, but if green energy gets cheaper, that might be the chink in the armor of the oil industry. And I'm curious what POW sees as, what might be something that could make fossil fuel sales go down.
It's the economics. I mean, it's already
Hmm.
happening. If
Hmm.
you're making decisions now on like a new type of power, like if you take it to the level of individual homeowners, heat pumps, which are electric sources, clean sources of how to heat and cool your home, they have been outselling gas furnaces. They're a better technology. Like I use them. They're awesome, whether they're geothermal or room by room, and they're just better. And so consumers are choosing that. So that's one place where you see that. Electric vehicles, those can be super fraught. That often gets politicized because it's more in like a consumer mode.
Hmm.
Transportation has also gotten a lot of investment funding more than other categories that maybe need it more. And I used to have a regular car. When I got an EV, my first thought was like, I just like this better. If this had gas, I would like this car better, but it doesn't.
Hmm.
And so I think that's really important too. Like we're making better products and we're making better systems and we're making better experiences, and that's going to win. But what happens is globally, fossil fuels get $7 trillion in subsidies. So explain the economic argument to me of this. These are some of the most profitable companies in the world. They are arguing for free market dynamics, and yet they are heavily, heavily subsidized. They are arguing to take away subsidies from wind and solar, and yet their subsidies actually exceed anything that's been passed in the climate realm. So, to me, as someone who relates to a libertarian and conservative perspective, that doesn't seem right to me. It seems like we should be investing in better experiences. We shouldn't have subsidies. We should let the free market run. But when you're up against a status quo that's bringing in non-market mechanisms, it doesn't work. And that's where the breakdown is happening.
We don't need to get into the policy and the politics of it, but my very small understanding is that subsidies are essentially tax breaks for these big oil companies and more. And it comes from the policies, right? It comes from political. I saw the other day that most oil companies get like a 22,000% return on the money they spend lobbying in Washington. And again, take that with a grain of salt. But it's intense how good these companies are at lobbying in Washington. And I think our listeners understand, but lobbying is essentially going to Washington, maybe in the way POW does, and helping convince politicians to vote for policies and laws that will help their point of view. And for the oil companies, it's getting subsidies and keeping the oil flowing.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up lobbying. Lobbying
Mhm.
is a dirty word to a lot of people. Sometimes I get feedback like, "Oh, like should POW really be lobbying? Like
Mhm.
is that the right approach here?" I don't know if F-bombs are okay on this podcast, but like
Oh, go ahead, let it
are
rip.
you fucking kidding me with that perspective? So first of all, the head of sustainability at Aspen, his name's Auden Schendler. He's taught me a lot. He has this great quote that's like, when environmentalists go to Washington, we show up with marshmallows to a gunfight. Like we are so outgunned by the
Yeah.
opposition. They spend so much money.
Hmm.
And what we have, this is something that Jeremy says a lot, and I take a lot of hope and a lot of strength in this. We are on the right side of history.
Hmm.
We have the authenticity of not only what should happen, but what is happening because this is starting to work. And
Hmm.
so when I think about lobbying, first, what has made lobbying dirty is these interests who are advocating against the interests of our communities, our economies, our future prosperity, our future national security for their own profitability. And that's how the system works. So, again, we're realists about that. I often ask myself, okay, I don't have money. What do we have at POW that could get us to show up and get a foot in the door? And so what we do is we bring the athletes and companies that work with POW. So these politicians don't want to meet with big finance and big oil.
Hmm.
When we roll in, they are psyched. They are meeting with Olympic medalists. They are meeting with constituents. We bring companies like Patagonia, REI, Burton, the coolest companies in the world, the ones
Hmm.
who are getting more people outside and employing people in our communities. And so that opens the door. And then we do a lot of work to basically know our shit and show up and share some of these arguments. We train our athletes. They go through pretty robust training systems. This is hard stuff to talk about with authority that
Hmm.
is manipulated. Like oftentimes people think, oh, I took a flight here. I can't show up and advocate. That is what fossil fuel companies drive and want us to think. We're held to a higher standard. But when I sit in those rooms, it is important to have those conversations. If you're not there, if you're not fighting for this, if you're not having those meetings and sharing your perspective, you have no chance of driving the conversation on this.
And it's such an important conversation. And we do have to confront that, what you just brought up. So a professional athlete goes to Washington to help you folks lobby for cleaner energy, and they feel guilty maybe because they took a flight there. You feel like a hypocrite. So the balance, and I assume you folks are focusing more on industry, but does POW focus more on industry or individuals? From my brief research, it looks like industry emits 60 to 70% of greenhouse gas, and individuals might do about 30 to 40%. But and my thoughts is it really does have to be systemic governmental change to get results. But I'm curious, how does POW balance the industry versus individual? Because that conversation will never die.
It's really all about systems. So we have to change systems. And
Hmm.
the way that we change how industry, it's primarily industry, how they impact systems is through policies, legislation, systemic change. If we thought an individual company or an individual could do it, we would absolutely pursue that path. That would
Hmm.
probably be easier than trying to go through the government.
Hmm.
But an example I like to use is seatbelts and traffic lights. Can you imagine today if someone was like, okay, when you get into a car, you have to put this thing on. And when you drive down the road, you can't drive wherever you want. You have to drive in your lane and you have to follow that red, yellow, or green light. And it's like, we saw this with mask mandates, right? People would be like, no way, dude, I'm doing what I want. And we would
Hmm.
all be hurt by that. We would all be getting in car accidents. And
Hmm.
so I view climate really similarly. We're all just kind of like doing our own thing right now, emitting carbon because there's no seatbelt that is forcing us to make a decision that is better for ourselves and better for everyone. And that's why legislation is the pathway here. And something else that, this has become more common knowledge in recent years. It might be new for some of your listeners. Back in the 70s, fossil fuel companies ran ad campaigns trying to get people to take individual accountability for recycling and
Hmm.
basically for pollution. And
Hmm.
that they essentially created the carbon footprint in an ad campaign. And so, again, just pause and question that. I've run marketing budgets. Why would you spend several $1 million on an ad campaign to create a carbon footprint as a fossil fuel company? It has to be increasing your business. That is the only reason you run a marketing campaign. So it's like this stuff is effed up. And like one of the really good things is that there's a lot of awareness. There is power building happening now, and people are waking up to this and saying, wait a minute, my home just burned down in LA. Something is going on here. We have to do something about it.
Absolutely. And in that vein, maybe you could call them oil companies too, but plastic companies did something similar back in the day when plastic started being a big problem, and they created the campaign called Litter Bug. When I was
Yes.
a kid growing up in the 80s, that was something you said to people, hey, don't be a litter bug. That wasn't something we came up with. That's something their plastic marketing pushed to us, got in our brains to say, hey, don't point the finger at us making all the garbage and trash. Point the finger at you. You guys are the problem, which wasn't true, right? Obviously, if they didn't make all the plastic, it wouldn't be all over the place. I do want to reiterate. I love that you say we got to change the systems because that's a better way. I was trying to pigeonhole you into the individual versus the industry because that's what we all talk about. But you're right, it's the systems because if we could change the systems, for example, if there only were electric cars, we'd all drive electric cars. So if there was only clean energy, we'd all use clean energy. So pointing out the individual, which happens all the time. I get it all the time on our social media. It's like, oh, well, you must not care about climate change because you flew to Europe. And I do care about, if there was an electric plane, I would take that. But you know what I'm saying. So I love the idea of we got to change systems. I think it's a better way to think about it than to think about the industry versus the individual.
Any individual action you take will move things by millimeters. It definitely contributes to the cultural dialogue around this. Any systems level action we take will move us miles, hundreds of miles, thousands of miles. And like we have metrics on this, like you can add up your carbon impact from a flight versus the Inflation Reduction Act, which is the biggest piece of climate policy in history. And if you want to learn more about this from the perspective of like a really awesome film on YouTube versus me
Mm.
getting all like fired up on this podcast, I would recommend Amy Engerbretsen's The Hypocrite. So
Mm.
something POW does is we support our athletes in their filmmaking. Being a modern athlete is astounding to me. Not only do you have to be like the best in the world at what you do, you're also a social media manager, you're a film producer, and Amy made this film that POW and Teton Gravity Research supported, which is all about how she gets into the backcountry, how she gets criticized for using snowmobiles and helicopters as access points for literally her profession. That is like her
Mhm.
commute to work, which I think
Mhm.
we underestimate. She gets to work on a snowmobile sometimes to ski these lines and do what she does. And so in the film, she talks about how hard it is to hear that criticism and how at first it made her not want to be a climate advocate. But then she realized like we're all imperfect. At POW, we call this imperfect advocacy. I don't do every sustainable thing that we can do, but that's okay because I'm focused on the biggest buckets and moving the needle in the biggest ways that I can. And that's how we make progress. It's imperfect, it's messy, it takes a while, and we really lean into that at POW.
I love that because as skiers and snowboarders, we're a little bit hard on the environment, right? Ski resorts release carbon into the air. We cut down trees to make ski resorts. We slide around on skis and snowboards made of petroleum, drive cars, we fly in planes, we use helicopters, use snowmobiles like Amy does to access skiing and riding. And so it's tough as skiers and riders to balance these ideas of enjoying our favorite sport and trying to stop greenhouse gas emissions. And so I guess you've kind of already said this, but so as skiers and riders, what is the best thing we can do to advocate for green energy and against climate change?
You have to show up with a movement and show up in spaces that might feel a little bit uncomfortable.
Mm.
So
Like that
go
city
to,
council meeting.
yeah, understand your local elections. We do a lot of get out the vote efforts. That's really important. If you compare voting to like the population, the biggest votes weren't for the Democratic Party or the Republican Party. The biggest votes were what we call the didn't vote party.
Mm.
Most people don't vote. And that is actually one of the primary ways to get your voice heard in all of this. And then I would recommend join organizations. They tend to be nonprofits. POW is just one of them. There are so many great environmental organizations. Some are doing more conservation efforts. We're really
What are
focused on
some of your
emissions.
favorites?
I love the Outdoor Alliance is this really great grouping of orgs that do a bunch of different things. There's the Access Fund, which is really focused on the climbing community. There's Surfrider, which is really focused on coastal and waterway and ocean protection. There's also the Conservation Alliance, which brands can join. That's more of like a company level initiative. There's a group called Rewiring America that helps you electrify your home.
Hmm.
So there are just so many ways that you can think about getting involved. And if you're an outdoor enthusiast and you want to take action on policy, well, it's really hard to do that on your own. So it's best to join an organization like POW. And this is like maybe the best deal going. Just by joining us, you are taking a really, really critical action. You're helping us grow our numbers and grow our power into the power we talked about, like with unions or with the National Rifle Association.
And how do we join POW?
On our website, look up Team POW. It's
Mhm.
free right now. It may not be in the future, so get a deal while you can. And another way is to work with your company. So people often underestimate just how important companies can be. We talked about how business and economics are big motivators in all this. I have CEOs who come to me and say, I want to get involved with POW because my employees keep telling me to. And when they get involved, then we take the power of a brand like Burton or Patagonia. We
Mhm.
bring those brands to Capitol Hill when we lobby. That is a totally different conversation. The legislators are definitely paying attention. And we're thoughtful about getting ones from their district, their state, and making sure they know that their constituents care about this. So you can talk to your company about joining our brand alliance. You can talk to your company about joining some of our activities, whether it's a lobby day, we write op-eds, we do a lot of campaigns. And like they don't have to be boring. We just did one with High West Whiskey that was about like drink whiskey and support climate. I mean, that's awesome. So
Yes.
we also do a lot of fun collabs that just bring energy to the outdoor space.
And let's be real for a second. It's money at the end of the day that is making things go one way or the other. So if we can get the money on the side of green energy and fighting climate change, like Patagonia, what's their annual gross? They must bring in so much money. So when you have somebody like, a heavyweight like Patagonia, like you're referring to, showing up with you, that changes everything. And that opens people's eyes and that opens politicians' eyes, I think, very much.
Oh yeah, they're the GOAT. They trailblaze this for all of us. So they're POW supporters. We also consider them like some of our foremost mentors and visionaries in what they're building for the space.
Fantastic. Yeah, having big companies on your side that have a lot of employees, that have a lot of money moving, that is going to catch policy. That is going to catch political eyes. So I think that's huge. So, to see how is climate change affecting snow sports, and that's the easiest way to say it. And what are the most pressing challenges? Because I've interviewed a lot of climate scientists on this show, and I even had the gentleman on who used to run the UC Berkeley Snow Lab at Donner Summit in Lake Tahoe. He ran that for 20 years. And it's just, I think in Lake Tahoe, we've lost 30 days of freezing temperatures per year. So winter's short enough and take a month away. And that kind of pisses me off. So I'm curious, what data have you seen? How is climate change affecting snow sports?
Climate change is without a doubt affecting the future economic viability of snow sports and our future ability to participate. So when I was at Aspen, we did a lot of research on this, and we found that in the past 40 years, similar to what you're citing with Tahoe, the resort has lost a month of its season.
Mm,
This is a 6 month season that is highly dependent on weather conditions. And like building a summer business is not the same as the winter business for these companies. And then you see that permeate to the companies making skis, making outerwear, making the products that get us outside. And there's this broader effect that's impacting the outdoors. I also worry a lot about lower altitude ski resorts,
mhm.
and it's tough. Sometimes it's hard to bring this up with ski resorts because we want them to succeed. We don't want to bring up something that is going to make their lives harder, but like this is the truth. And one of the reasons why POW started alongside groups like Altera and Aspen and Jackson was because of this and needing more of an ability to influence long-term change in this category. But if you look at where ski resorts are developing, most new developments are 10,000 feet and higher because there's
Mhm.
climate resilience. If you look at Vail's stock price, they're getting hammered. And that's for a couple reasons. But one reason I think is because climate risk is getting priced into their portfolio and their ability to continue to charge for this experience.
Absolutely. And I won't follow up on that because that's too complicated. But you personally, someone super passionate about both snow sports, environmental protection, how do you balance all these interests in your personal life?
How do I balance anything in my personal life?
Especially
This
someone
is
with two little kids.
this is a good question. We just do it all together.
Yeah.
Like we're out there. When I go skiing with my kids, I'm like handing out POW stickers and
Nice.
I'll like, bring up something that the resort did in their lift line that comes from my resort days.
Hmm.
So I think it all blends together. Something I've learned from our POW team, my background is more on the corporate side. Most of our POW team is long-term community organizers, environmentalists, a few outdoor industry people, former athletes,
Hmm.
and they have this tremendous ability to ride the highs and lows. There are real highs and lows in this work. And an example, we did a Stoke the Vote campaign this past fall,
Hmm.
did the best work our organization has ever done, and still did not get enough climate champions elected.
Hmm.
And so you sort of look at that. Like I was asking for mentorship on this the other day, and Jessie Diggins is on our board. She's the best Nordic skier in US history, male, female, whatever. Like she's a boss. And
Hmm.
she said, "Hey, like this is athletics. You just gotta like, you have a bad lap, you gotta keep going. And you lose the race, guess what? There's another one in 2 days, and you need to be ready for it. And you need to show up for your team." So I really like having athletics as that foundation and like everything we're doing and as a way to get through some of this work.
And as the relatively new CEO of POW, what might be your most acute goal? And I don't want to put words in your mouth, but is it community? Is it getting more people? Is it handing out stickers? Is it getting more people? Because I feel like that's where the power is, getting more people into our union, if you will. Or is it getting those the lobbies done? Is it getting into Washington? Is it getting into those policy makers' ears and eyes?
All of the above, but you
Hmm.
nailed it. It's really about bringing people into this movement.
Right.
I think if I could get more of those 175 million people showing up for the work, showing up in social comments, showing up at political events, asking their companies to do more of this work, that would do so much. The way that you solve climate change is through this political and cultural will. And that's the irony. We know the science. It's like we have to position people to do it, to be able to change those systems.
And that's where the power is to come back to what we talked about at the beginning of the podcast is if we can get this quote unquote union of POW huge, if there was 175 million people, you'd be able to put your thumb on the scale. You'd be able to contact your local congressperson or whoever and say, hey, I got 175 million people standing behind me. This is what we would like you to do. Let's make that happen. And you mentioned events. Are there any upcoming events or initiatives that you're particularly excited about?
We're really focused now. Honestly, it took some time to react to what's happening. Like there are record levels of dismantling of environmental protections happening. So whether that's withdrawing from the Paris Climate Agreement or removing pathways for wind and solar development via executive order. Some of what is challenging right now is it's just been so hard to navigate such a rapid pace of change. But I think we've gotten through that. And as we look forward, I mean, we're always excited about activations we do at the World Cup, at the Olympics. We had 4 Summer Olympians. Everyone is like, oh, POW winter. And I'm like, actually, our fastest growing categories are bike and run. So we're showing up at more of those events than we ever have. We typically go to the Outside Festival. They're a great partner, and that's a gathering of the outdoor industry. And yeah, we have so much coming up. And like historically, we've been so focused on these big events. We speak at the UN, we speak at the Senate Budget Committee. But honestly, what I'm most excited about is showing up in communities That's where I think the magic is going to happen. I do not think it's going to be fast. It's going to take us a long time to do this work. But I think there are going to be so many benefits from people showing up in a brewery in Bozeman, Montana, and figuring out how we unite to form that union, which we have a name for, which is the outdoor state. So the outdoor state is that 175 million people who, if united, we would be the greatest force for change and we would accomplish it. With all those people, that is political will. That cannot be ignored.
That outdoor state would be very, very powerful. And it is already powerful. We just got to continue to grow it because I think there's just a lack of awareness that people don't quite understand maybe that this is how you gain power in our system is getting
Exactly.
together. It's all about union. It's all about being together. It's, like this says on the dollars and quarters and whatever, a pluribus unum, right? Like together, we are more powerful than we are divided, obviously. And I looked at even Michaela Schifrin the other day. I had her on her collar. It said POW, right? The best
Yeah.
skier in the world, history of anything ever skiing. So yeah, so there are important voices. There are regular people who just like to ski or just enjoy clean water and air. And we just all need to get together and make this thing happen. But before I go, I do have to ask you about being the youngest woman to run a marathon in all 7 countries. Where did you do each of these? And at least tell us about Antarctica.
Yeah, so when I was in my early 20s, I became the youngest woman to run a marathon on all 7 continents. And it
It's
grew out
insane.
of it's totally insane.
I
And
love it.
like part of what I think people can take away from that is to never be afraid of alternative definitions of success.
Mhm.
And at POW, Jeremy inspires on me on this. Like he's built Jones Snowboards into this really cool brand that stands for something in the snowboard space, makes exceptional products. Same with POW. And I often think we have monolithic definitions of success. So historically in running, it's okay, you line up, whoever gets there first wins. And my interest in running has always been discovery and travel and connection. So I started running races around the world, realized similar to like if you know about fastest known time or like if you're on Strava, like local legend, there are these other categories that if you're not gifted with speed, which I really am not, you can pursue different goals. And so the marathon project came out of that. And so I went to China. I went and ran around the base of Mount Kilimanjaro. I ran in
Wow.
Dublin and had a beer at mile 24. I mean, like all these just like great experiences. But the pinnacle experience was running in Antarctica. And it's obviously a very unusual thing. Antarctica is regulated by permits. Only a certain number of people can even go there per year, let alone run a race. And so there were about 60 of us, and I had signed up like several years in advance to like get this spot. And I was like sort of lucky because they're hard to get. And I just remember going there and having this experience of like, first, I was riding this boat to get there with a bunch of scientists, and all they were talking about was temperature. And this
Mm,
was in like 2006. And
mm.
like, we are in a way worse spot today than we were in 2006. They were already aware of what was happening. And then when I ran there, like when you have that experience where you go to a place where humans don't exist, you just have a different relationship with the natural world. And I took a lot of that back with me. And I think it was an influence in combining sport and environmental action in the work that I pursue today.
And what was the temperature during your run?
So we had the warmest summer, it's their summer, February, like
Mhm.
ever. And it was 32 degrees Fahrenheit. And
Oh, wow.
all the scientists, and I had trained in upstate New York in like -10. So I was like
Right.
ready. I had taken on the coldest weather training possible. And, to be fair, the year before they had a blizzard and it was horrible.
Right.
But the scientists were all saying, oh, like it was actually raining during our race. And they were like, yeah,
Whoa.
this is what's happening in these environments now. And so to go and experience that and have it be like, wow, you sort of have this mental image of this like frozen tundra, and actually this could be like an average day in most US cities in the winter.
Wow. That's how you were overheating.
She was overdressed because I was like, I know the temperature says this, but it's Antarctica and it is
Yeah.
going to be colder. And it wasn't. It was really warm.
And where were you? Were you at McMurdo or where did you guys do it?
So there's a part of Antarctica that's a peninsula that
Oh,
juts up.
okay.
It's the closest to Chile and Patagonia. And so you
Okay.
get on a boat at the bottom of Patagonia. It's a 2 day, very intense boat ride. And then you get there and it's kind of funny. The race director is like, okay, we have a 3 day weather window. We might run tomorrow. And for most marathon runners, like you're super OCD and you're like,
Right.
we might run tomorrow. That doesn't work for my nutrition schedule, but like you just have to deal with it.
That's really, really cool. I really appreciate your time and energy today. Thank you so much, Erin. Is there any final message or call to action you'd like to share here at the end?
It was so fun to talk about snow and get a little nerdy on clean energy. I hope it wasn't too nerdy and people are like fired up right now. But I would say join us in climate work. It's joyful, it's fun, there's a solution. We have a phrase at POW that the best way to combat apathy and discontent and like maybe borderline horror with what's happening in the world right now is to take action. And so take action by joining Team POW, take action by learning more, connect with any organization that speaks to you, that gets you more involved in your community, and join the climate movement. It's fun. And I'm having the best time I've ever had in my career leading this work. And I would love to see more people join us.
Well, thanks again for your time and energy. Congrats again on your joy and your CEO role at POW. And always let us know if there's anything we can do here at Snowbrains to help you good folks.
Awesome. Sounds great.
Thank you so much for listening to the Snowbrains podcast. If you like this podcast, please share with friends and family, and please make sure to subscribe. To find out more about Snowbrains, please visit us at snowbrains.com. You can also find us on Instagram, Facebook, X, and more. This episode of the Snowbrains podcast is brought to you by Club Med. Ditch the hassle and embrace the freedom of an all-inclusive ski vacation with Club Med. Their resorts in the European Alps and Canada offer the perfect blend of exhilarating skiing, exceptional service, and worry-free pampering. Enjoy having lift tickets, delicious meals, lessons for all ages, and endless apres-ski fun, all included in one price. While the kids are having a blast at the supervised children's clubs, you can focus on mastering your skiing skills and creating unforgettable memories on and off the slopes. Visit www.clubmed.us or call 1-800-CLUB-MED or call your travel advisor to experience skiing without limits. This episode of the Snowbrains podcast was edited by Liam Abbott. Music by Chad Crouch. And I'm your host, creator, and director, Miles Clark.